Alright team, let's talk standard arrays, right? So we are going to look at a bunch of questions, 10 questions in total, and we are going to answer them one by one. And as we are answering them, we will also write some code, right? So question one, what is a standard array, right? Think of a standard array as something that's fixed size, right? It's part of the standard library. It's fixed size. That means the size has to be determined at compile time, and once it's constructed, you cannot add or remove elements from the array, right? You can modify the elements that are in the array, but you cannot add or remove elements from it. All right, question two, how to construct a standard array, right? So before C++17, this is how you did it, right? Standard array, and the first thing you provided is the type, right? Do you want it to be an array of ints? Do you want it to be an array of strings? Do you want it to be an array of doubles, right? Depends on you. So let's do ints, right, to keep it simple. That's the first template argument. The second one is the size that you have to provide, right? Like I said, it's fixed size, right? You have to define the size at compile time. So let's say we have an array of 3 elements. Let's call it ARR, meaning array, and let's put some elements in it, right? Let's say we put in a 2, we put in a 7, and we put in a 9, right? That's it, guys. That's how you defined an array in C++, but before C++17. Now here is the fun part. After, with C++17, right, you don't need this part. Isn't that cool, right? So first, let's do one thing. Let's add a simple helper here called print array, and let's take array as an argument here. Let's do it as a reference, and let's make it a const because we don't want to change it. And let's just simply iterate over the array one by one. We can use const auto ref a array, and let's just print the elements in the array to output, right? So let's do them one by one, and as always, don't forget the includes, right? Very important. So array. So let's call this function after we have constructed our array, and let's see what it does. Hopefully we should see the elements in the array. There you go. And like I said, right, with C++17, you do not need this part, right? It's going to automatically deduce the type and the size from the arguments you provided in the constructor. Isn't that cool, right? So let's remove this part and let's run the program again. There you go. All right, question three, right? How to access an element of the array, right? So now that you have constructed an array, how do you access, let's say, element 7, right? There are two ways. Remember, there are two ways, right? The first way is using the add function, right? The add function takes in the index of the element that you want to access. So let's say you want to access 7, which is at index 1, right? And let's also print it. That way we get to see what we accessed, right? If I run this, we are going to first, let's remove this print array so that we don't add any confusion. But there you go, right? You accessed element 7 using the add function. Now here is the thing, right? What if you access a element that's non-existent, right? What if you try to access something at, let's say, index 3, right? Index 3 does not exist in this array, right? What happens? Let's run this. You get a standard out of range exception, right? Isn't that amazing? So if you try to access an element using the add function which is not existent in the array, you're going to see a standard out of range exception, and then you can put this block of code in a try catch and catch that exception. But this is one way to access elements in an array. The second way, which I don't like, is the old style way, right? Using the square brackets. So you can also do this. You can also use square brackets on your array, and that way you can also access the elements. Now the part that's bad about this is if you try to access an element that's out of bounds, let's say, you the behavior is undefined. You don't know what's going to happen here, right? So if I run this, you see this? You got a 1 from somewhere. There's no 1 in this array. What's this one about, right? Let's access like the 10th element, right? Let's see what happens. You got a 0, right? So it's accessing a part of the memory which is way out of bounds, right? So I would recommend using at every time, because if you're doing something wrong, if you're trying to access a element that does not exist, it's at least going to throw an exception. With square brackets, you don't know what's going to happen. It's undefined behavior, right? So just something to keep in mind. All right, question 4, right? So before we get to question 4, let's clean up some code here, right? So let me remove all the questions we have answered so far. So 1, 2, 3 can simply go away. Let's remove these two as well, and let's keep the construction of the array and the printing part, right? So question 4, how to access the first element of the array, right? Let's say you can obviously use the at and the square brackets function that we just saw, so be careful while using square brackets. But there's a function that the standard array class exposes, and it's called front, right? So if you do array dot front, you're going to access the first element in your array, right? And let's prove this. So if I print this, you should see the first element in your array, right? Oops, oh, my bad, syntax error. Let's run this again, and you saw a 2, right? So if I change this to, let's say, 22, I should see a 22, right? So remember, if you want to access the first element of the array, the standard array class exposes a function called front, right? Now, very similarly, you might wonder, okay, is there something to access the last element of the array? And there is, right? So the fifth question is how to access the last element of the array, and the function that gets you the last element is called back, right? So if I run this, we should see 22 and 9, right? There you go. So you can always use the at operator or the square brackets, but the array class also exposes two functions that gets you the first and the last element of the array, right? Question 6, how to check if array has any elements in it, right? So there might be a use case you might have where you want to check if the array that you constructed has any elements in it or not, right? An easy way to do this is use the empty function on the array, right? So the array class provides a function which is public. It's called empty, right? And if you uh, print this, and let's comment these two out, you should see a boolean value, right? So in this case it will be either it can be either 1 or a 0. So it's 0 is false, 1 is true. So because our array has elements in it, we got a 0 back, right? The array is not empty, right? And if I negate this, you should obviously see a 1, right? Because we're negating this. So a very interesting way and an easy way to check if the array has any elements or not, just use the empty function, right? Straightforward. All right, before we move on to our next question, let's clean up some code here, right? So let me remove question 4, 5, and 6, and let's look at question 7, right? How to check the size of the array. Let's say you want to check, or you want to know the number of elements that are in your array, right? An easy way to do this is use the function called size, right? And if we print this to the output, we should see a size of this array as 5, right? Now there is another function that the standard array class exposes. It's called max size, right? And what it basically allows is it allows you to check the maximum possible elements the array can hold. I don't think that function is really important because if you think about it, an array, in case of an array, you have to define the size at compile time, right? It's not a dynamic container. So both your size and max size are always going to be the same, right? So if I use this max size function on the array, I should see a 5 again. I think the main reason why they added this function was to make the standard array container with other standard containers, right? Like vectors and map stuff. So those functions expose those containers expose this function. So that's why they added an array. But I don't think it adds any great value. Question 9: how to fill the array with some default data, right? Let's say, so first of all, let's remove some code here. In fact, also let's remove the array that we already have here and let's clean it up. Okay, so let's say you want to construct an array which is huge, right? Let's say array, and let's give it a type of char this time. Let's say you want 100 elements, right? And let's call it char array. Now, one way to initialize all the values in the array is you manually keep on doing, right? 100 manually keep on adding like 100 elements. O, A, B, C. It's time consuming, right? It's going to take you forever. To solve this problem, standard array provides a function, right? It's called fill, right? So you can simply use the fill function, char array.fill, and you can provide it a value, right? So let's say we want all our default elements to be all A's, right? And let's print this out. So char array, and I think we'll have to change the type here and 100, right? So you should see 100 A's on the console here, right? Isn't that cool? So whenever there's a use case where you want to construct an array of like a large number of elements and you don't want to define them manually one at a time, you can always use the fill function to, initialize all the values to some default value. All right, last question: how to swap two arrays, right? Let's clean up some more code here and let's start writing some new code. So let's say you have an array of type int. Let's say it has two elements and let's call it array1. Let's give it some values. So let's say 33 and let's say 66, right? You have another array of the same type. Let's call it array2 and let's give it some other values, 44 and 88, right? Now the task is you want to swap the contents of these two arrays, right? So you want array1 to have 44 and 88 and you want array2 to have the values of 33 and 66, right? One way to do it would be you can manually write 44 and 88 to array1 and manually write 33 and 66 to array2. But the standard array class provides an easier way to do it, right? And you can use a function called swap, right? The way this works is you can use an array. So let's use array1. Let's call dot swap on it and give it the array that you want to swap with, right? So array2. So once you have done this, let's check out the contents of both the arrays, right? So let's use our nice helper here. Let's call it print array. Let's give it array1 and let's also print array2, right? Let's not print array2 first, but let's print array1, and I think we'll have to change the types here, int and 2, right? So let's print array1. Let's see what we get. There you go. Array1 now has 44 and 88 in it. Why? Because this swap operation swapped the contents. And if we print array 2, we should hopefully see 33 and 66, right? 33 and 66. There you go. So if you want to swap contents, the insides of the two arrays, you can always use the swap function. There are a bit of gotchas here, right? Like for example, I according to the official documentation, it does not cause the iterators and the references associated with arrays to swap, right? So those don't change, but the contents will definitely be swapped. So something to be aware of. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you have now become an expert when it comes to standard arrays. There are a bit of more functions that we could have covered, like there's a function called data, there's a bunch of iterators that you get on the standard arrays. So if you want me to cover that, please post your comments and I'll be more than happy to cover those as well, right? Guys, I hopefully you enjoyed this video and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.